There is a significant issue in several nations with stray animals, particularly cats and dogs that wander the streets. Due to their sheer number, it's challenging to rehome or provide sustenance for them, leading to a saddening sight. Conversely, only a handful of nations struggle with a similar predicament concerning horses. Wild horses are a common sight in several countries, but they can fend for themselves and are visually appealing. The horses in the tale we're about to delve into are not as content as they once were. Formerly employed as working horses, they now have no place to call home. We'll be examining a remarkable rescue story that's both heartwarming and heartbreaking. In Romania, horses and donkeys were commonly employed for transportation and agricultural purposes. These creatures were workhorses, which is why horse-drawn carts were still a common sight in many Romanian cities. Owning a horse or a donkey in a cart was much less expensive than owning a vehicle in a country where many people are poor. This is still a big consideration. The only problem came when they had to care for the animal's well-being. In the long run, if families don't have enough to look after their own needs, looking after an animal is even harder. Even people who love animals and have the best of intentions don't always have the means. They would give these animals what they could, and that might not be enough to sustain them as they deserved. They would make some money from their own little businesses with their cart. But even here, the animals would be the ones pulling the most weight. In a very literal sense, and those are just the good stories, there are some that are much worse. Then the European Union made a new law trying to ban this practice of horse-drawn carts being used on roads, and Romania decided to get behind it. People would be fined, and even jail time was an option if caught using these carts on the road with other vehicles. They implemented this law with the best of intentions to give these animals their rights back and help them. And also, and mainly for the safety of other road users, but it didn't quite turn out all that positively. Although carts were not technically illegal, there were no roads that they could be used on. It forced people to stop using them, which admittedly was the intention of many lawmakers. But instead of being a way to help these working animals, it just made the situation worse for a while. People who were already strapped for cash had no way to bring in money. They had no way to care for their families, even less to care for animals that used to be a source of income. Even people who really cared about their animals were having a hard time. More and more horses were abandoned on the street. They were of no use to some of these owners. Letting go might have seemed like a desperate attempt at getting back to financial stability. That is where one family came in. The Bossy family really did care for their horse. They would even go without to make sure that Kopek had at least some food and was taken care of. Often, he would have to eat less than a horse should be eating, but his family tried. In an area where many others just didn't care, this family's horse stood out from the crowd as being cared for. They never packed the cart with more than he could handle. That made sure that he never had to endure the painful blisters that often came with pulling a cart. They made sure that he had rest between days of work and was never tried out to the point of exhaustion. In short, this was a good family that really tried their best. Then the new law came and their little business went under. They had nothing left. The father did go out and look for work, but with so many doing the same, it was hard to find anything. And many of them, including the Bossy family, had no way to get to work. Since a horse and cart had been their main form of transportation for many years, it was a lot to adapt to. The husband did eventually find a job, but the pay was barely enough to pay for the vehicle that he would need to get to work. They tried to look after Kopek as best as they could, but the family needed to eat too. The kids were young and had to be cared for. Kopek was losing weight and they were becoming desperate. They phoned all the vets and shelters in the area. They didn't just want to abandon Kopek, but soon they would have no choice with such a big issue in the city. The answer was the same each time. They were too full and there was no space for another horse. They couldn't afford to take in another animal. The family was devastated. They didn't have many options left, and then they had yet another setback. Their young son fell from his bike riding to the school close by. He fell and broke his leg. The medical bills would take what little savings they had left. Everything that they used to care for Ko up to that point. If they kept him, he would starve. They had to at least try to give him his best shot. This was a city environment, and there were not a lot of places where a horse could be left where he still might have some food to eat. Finally, outside of the city, they found a big open space that had a lot of grass. There was even a little stream running through it. It was a distance, and those that didn't care about their abandoned horses wouldn't search this far for a suitable place to leave him. The family took him to the spot, and with heavy hearts, they said their goodbyes. This was the best they could do for Kopek, but they didn't know if it would be enough. At least here, he would have plenty to eat and drink, so they thought. There were even some trees that would provide shade. The family wouldn't be able to come back and check on him. Traveling that distance might not seem like much to many of us, but for them it would mean the difference between a meal for that day and visiting Kopek. He was on his own, and he didn't know how to handle it. There was a lot of grass surrounding him, but the problem was that Kopek had always been kept at a stable. He was fed hay for most of his life, and the city didn't really have grassy patches. He didn't realize that the stuff he was standing in was food, so he didn't eat much. Even when he became really hungry, he couldn't find any food that he was familiar with. He might have taken a few bites after days of desperation, but the grass and the green trees were becoming more scarce. He drank some of the water from the stream, and this helped to keep him going. But one early morning as he reached the stream, he couldn't drink from it. There was no water left, only ice. He was cold each night, really hungry, and he became more thirsty. This wasn't the life that Kopek had ever known. He had always been loved. Yes, there had been many years when he didn't get enough food. Some would even say that he had starved for years, but never anything like this, and now he had no idea how to care for himself. The situation was desperate. The horse was becoming weak. He couldn't easily stand anymore, and he was not doing well. Night had come, and the cold started to seep into every part of his body. He felt like he couldn't move. It was a long night, but even when daylight came, it didn't feel like any heat came with it. He was cold and hungry, and Kopek was at the point where he wanted to give up. He lay down on the cold ground and was ready to give up completely. Kopek would not have made it for even a few more hours, but then something unexpected. Just as he was about to close his eyes, he heard voices coming to him. As he approached, a few of them were recognizable, calling out his name and sprinting towards him. It was the Basi clan, accompanied by a group of other individuals. Without delay, those with them provided him with food and covered him in snug blankets. The family was in tears and expressing gratitude towards the rescuers, unable to forget about their horse and consistently seeking assistance. After a prolonged wait, an exceptional rescue occurred in Romania, with animal welfare groups stepping up to provide aid. Despite facing numerous challenges, they made every effort to assist Kopek and nursed him back to a healthy state. They aimed to find him a permanent home where he'll always be well cared for in the future. I hope you liked this video. Please share and subscribe to our video. Thank you for watching.